Hey guys, today we are going to learn about the table saw, the different elements of the table saw, how to be able to identify those elements, and how to safely operate. Here we have our SawStop table saw. We've got the table, the fence. This is how we unlock the fence. Slides one side to the other. If you're a lefty, you can take this off and put it to the other side of the blade and clamp it down. Our throat plate, which can be removed to access the inside of the saw. We obviously will never remove that unless we have the saw unplugged. Got our splitter here. That's what keeps the wood from closing down on itself if the grain of the wood causes the board to flex in as it's cut. These are anti-kickback devices. There are two of them. And it's important to note that you have to have the depth of this saw blade set correctly in order for these to function correctly. Here's our blade guard that must be down in order to protect us. Back in the back here, we've got some dust collection. This is more dust collection that's actually not hooked up at this point in time. Down here on the front, we have this is the switch that turns the computer on, but this is what we're going to use to operate the saw. If we pull the paddle toward us, it will turn the saw on. If we push the paddle in, it will turn the saw off. Here we can unlock and crank on the blade height adjustment. If I turn that, it will go up or down as needed. Over here on the side, we have a similar adjustment. If I crank that, I can control the bevel of the blade. As you can see, demonstrated by the bevel gauge. We'll lock that down, and we'll lock this down. So those are the different parts of the table saw. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how to safely operate. Okay guys, we're going to work out how to operate this safely and effectively. So let's say we're going to cut this piece to 4 inches. I'm going to measure between the fence and this right side of the blade. The reason for that is, if you think about it, everything between the right side and the left side of the blade is going to turn into sawdust. So if I measure to the left side and everything between the left side and the right side turns into sawdust, then I know my measurement will be incorrect. So I'm going to measure right to the tooth. I'm just going to throw that tape measure up there, measure right to the tooth, and I'm going to lock that down. Now as I lock it, it might move on me, and if it does, I'll just unlock it, tap it a little bit, get it to where I want it, and relock it. Okay. We'll talk later about how to ensure accuracy on that. That'll come at a later time. Now I have to set my depth. We want the depth of the table saw to be 1/4 of an inch, or roughly 1 tooth above the wood. Now the reason why this is very important is because if you have an excessive amount of blade height above the wood, number one, it's going to create excessive friction, and it's going to cause you issues in your cut, with your accuracy, and a potential kickback. The other reason is because this anti-kickback device back here is dependent upon the depth of the blade. If I run this board in, like I'm cutting it, and then I try to bring it backwards, you'll notice that both this and this are catching the blade, and the harder I try to pull, the more deeply they embed in the wood. That is to prevent a kickback, which would be shooting this board backward out of the saw and potentially into me as the operator. Now I want you to notice what happens if this is too high. Imagine someone was cutting some 2x4 material before me and they had this set, and I walk up, I don't set the depth, I go ahead and make my cut. As I run this through, you'll notice it does not engage this anti-kickback. And the larger one, it just slides right past. So setting the depth correctly is very much a part of the safety operation of this saw, because it is what helps you to ensure that you don't have kickback. So I've got my width set, I've got my depth set. Now I need to make sure that I have a push stick. I've got my width set, I've got my depth set, and I'm prepared to make my cut. Now I'm gonna make sure that this comes down, and I need to make sure that I maintain 4 inches of space between me and the blade at all times so that I don't end up with 4 fingers. That's how we remember that. We're gonna maintain 4 inches so we don't end up with only 4 fingers. Very important. So I've got my blade guard down. I've got some push sticks right here handy where I can reach them. And I'm gonna turn on my dust collector and I'm going to make a cut. I'm gonna make sure that my piece of wood is not touching the blade when I start it, because if I do, we could have a potential kickback. Start the saw by pulling the paddle toward myself. I stand off to the side so I'm out of the kickback zone, and I use my hands to apply downward pressure and pressure in toward the fence. Now, my non-dominant hand, when my thumb, which is hanging below the wood, makes contact with the table, then I remove my dominant hand and I grab a push stick and I begin to push it forward. My non-dominant hand never goes any farther forward, so I can take it off of the saw. You just might have heard the difference in sound as the wood made it past the blade. At that point, I can let go and I can shut off the saw and wait. Now, if I did not push the wood past the blade, I would need to keep my push stick on here until that blade comes to a stop. Now, I'm never going to reach out over the saw and pull these boards out. Instead, I'm going to come around the back side of the saw and I'm going to remove them this way. That way I'm not leaning out over the blade. Now I want you guys to imagine I'm making this cut, like I just did, and I want you to think about if rather than pushing here, I was to push right here. So imagine we're making that cut, we come through here, and that cut is completed, and I'm holding this piece out here. This piece is not being held. The kickback danger lies between the blade and the fence, because as the blade spins and it vibrates, it can bind on this piece. And this piece in between the blade and the fence is the kickback danger. And for that reason, you are never to try to push a piece of stock through the table saw with your push stick outside of this area between the blade and the fence. Always push between the blade and the fence. If you're not able to do that because the piece is too narrow and you can't get your push stick through there, then you need to talk to your instructor about a special setup. But under no circumstances are you ever to push this through on this side. And the reason is because while you have anti-kickback protection on the saw, if you were to walk up to this saw and forget to set it to the correct depth, then your anti-kickback is not going to be effective and you may hurt yourself. So always push the push stick through between the blade and the fence. So I'm going to demonstrate for you one more time how to make a cut. So we'll set our width. We'll go 2 1/2 inch. All right, we'll lock it down so this cannot move. We'll set our height 1/2 or 1/4 inch above, because we know that it's necessary to have the correct height in order to have a kickback protection and avoid unnecessary friction. We've got our blade guard down to protect us. We have our push stick where it's easily accessible. We have nothing laying on the table other than our workpiece. We start our dust collection. Turn the saw on, get set, get yourself out of the kickback zone. Bring the workpiece in so my non-dominant thumb contacts the table. Put my push stick on while applying pressure toward the fence. Push it through, make it clear of the blade, stop, shut the saw, shut off the dust collector, pull out the offcut, pull out the workpiece, and we're all done. We've just made a safe cut on the table saw.